Okay, so I picked up a chart from Evans and Lobeke, which was at that time, I'm trying to get rid of this thing here. Which was kind of the leading audit text at that time. And basically, they defined the audit in 4 stages. The first stage is basically the audit planning. Plan and design the audit approach. First, you kind of do the business thing. You as an auditor accept the client. Now, that's already something interesting that has happened over the years. Because there was so much litigation against auditors in 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago, larger firms started rejecting risky businesses. Because most of litigation against auditors is when the firm fails. Over 50% of lawsuits where CPA firms pay big damages for poor audits, or at least alleged poor audits, is when the company go bankrupt. So what happened? Large firms started not taking risky clients. And that still goes on today. But actually, if you think on societal terms, who needs more auditing than anyone else? Are the risky firms. So societally, that's not very good. And I think that's reduced these days because the number of lawsuits against auditors because of precedents have went down. But you have to understand why audit firms get sued. You say, oh, because they did bad audits. No, they get sued because after bankruptcy, who has money left? The firm is bankrupt. The bank is not really involved. So the only person who has deep pockets is the CPA firm. So that's why they get sued. However, on the other sense, firms have very often been found to be sloppy. The PCAOB has a whole inspection program. And the inspection program is directed at checking if the firms are doing their job. And that's a whole different discussion, big literature around it, and et cetera, et cetera. Next time we'll be talking about audit quality. So what do you do in phase 1? Phase 1, you study the client and accept the client. Once the client's accepted, you plan your audit. How do you plan your audit? You plan your audit by you understand the client's business and industry, assess the client business risk, and do some preliminary analytical procedures, decide what is materiality level. Remember, materiality level is what is the error that is acceptable in this business measurement. Understand the internal control, which is also gives you the control risk. And separately understand what is the area of fraud risk, and create a strategy for auditing. Many large companies, when are audited by third-party auditors, have something like they have 20 subsidiaries. You this year audit this subsidiary, next year audit that subsidiary. So that you do this planning over time. And there is a lot of research to be done about risk assessment. Now you have to understand why do you evaluate risk? You evaluate risk because it's not economic to examine everything on a business. So you choose the things that are more risky and put more verification efforts on them. And meaning there is no plan of battle that survives contact with the enemy. So you're auditing, you start finding things, you change what your risk assessment is, you change the effort of audit, or you start auditing and see a certain sector that you're going to examine very clean and very organized, you go and audit something else. So that's kind of the planning. And what you are doing there is saying, I have, let's say, 2,000 audit hours budgeted for this. I'm going to put 100 hours on this, 200 hours on that, and et cetera, et cetera. That's what the audit planning is, part. But for planning, you also need to understand controls. And the better the controls, less audit you need to do. So you do all these tests of controls, which is your second stage audit, and then you look at certain transactions and see if these transactions are accurate. Now, if you think the controls are good, you do less detailed testing, substantive testing. If you think the controls are weak, you do more testing. Now, this part of discussion of sampling, of evaluating specific transactions, was very much in the past statistical based. So there is a very famous study by Lobecki, Netter, and then Netter, and then Netter and Lobecki, basically creating this whole field of statistical sampling. And what is, just in a very, very simple example of statistical sampling, is you have a population of 1,000 transactions. You pick up a subsample of that, let's say 50, examine that sample, and then based on your result, you extrapolate the result to the full population. And there is a lot about sampling, a lot of technologies, and etc. The problem, modern problem, is that now populations are not 1,000, they are 1 million or 100 million. And picking up a sample of 100, 200, or 1,000 or 2,000 doesn't represent at all the population. Still, sampling is widespread in all audit procedures. And most firms tend to do judgmental sampling. Oh, let's pick 20 and examine. Now, our project with AICPA called the RADAR project, Rutgers AICPA Data Analytics Research Initiative, had a sub-project called MADS, which was a sampling project, but was not sampling, was full population testing. And you are going to actually review a paper by Jamie and Youngbaum looking at applying the MADS methodology. Why are we doing full population testing? Because what has happened over the years is that computers came in, and computers can deal with much larger populations. And you can do it cheaply. So there is the possibility of full population testing, and the MADS project did 5 projects trying to apply full population testing. Has it been adopted? Absolutely not. It's not even close. But we have showed it to the PCOB many, many times, and I think eventually it's going to get there. Let's see when. Okay, so the idea here was you plan your allocation of risk, you evaluate controls, you look at some transactions, and then maybe you revise what you think your risks are, and then you go to phase 3, where you apply analytical procedures and you look at balances.
Miklos, I had a question here about the statistic method. It's like when I was learning the CPA for this auditing, they said the auditors will set risk level and then compare to their statistical result, and then they decide to refuse the result or or something like this. But I was quite confused. Like they said that risk level based on their experience. Do we have any kind of new technologies that can help these auditors to set this risk level?
Yeah, that's actually what the MADS does. I can give you in 20 seconds a review of MADS is. MADS basically picks up the entire population and talks to auditors and say, what are the problems you're worried about? Or the wording that they use is, what can go wrong? And then you create filters for what can go wrong. So you create a filter for 5 things that go wrong or 7 things that go wrong. And then if you run your population to it, because you now have computers and the cost of doing this is reasonably small, and then you finish up with some transactions that failed 1 test or 2 tests or 5 tests. And we call those things notable items. A notable item is an item that you know that failed 1 of the tests or 2 tests or 10 tests. Okay. Now, this is out of Hussein Issa's dissertation originally. And his dissertation was called Exceptional Exceptions. But we didn't want to call it exceptions because there is a standard about how to deal with exceptions. And when you find an exception, you need to expand your sample, you need to do things, and to do a series of things. But the big difference between MADS and statistical judgmental sampling is that when you filter through, you actually examine every transaction for the things that you think that could be going wrong. So by the time you are done with your notable items, you examined everything. And some very large, big problems will not pass. But with a sample, you have 1 million items. I actually have some slides here. I don't think I'm going to have time to show you that I presented to the IASB, the International Auditing Standard, that talks about this. But now you can do better than that. But companies continue doing a lot of sampling and a lot of kind of judgment-based extrapolation, which is very, very weak methodology. And then once you've done this test, you kind of say, is there material error on this? If there is no material error, you issue opinion. Or in the audit report, in the opinion, you might have exceptions. I didn't audit this, I didn't audit that. There are a whole set of things that we call today key audit matters that you might have to report in your audit that you didn't have to report in the past. The outcomes of the audits are either a clean opinion or a subject to opinion or a rejected opinion. But you don't find rejected opinions. Okay? CPA firms will tend to resign before they issue a rejected opinion. Okay, and typically they have to file a form with the SEC why they resign, and typically they will say economic reasons, we didn't agree on fee or something like that, because they don't want to lose the rest of the clientele. But if you look at this whole story, the traditional audit story is you do a lot of audit planning, you focus, or you do planning, you look at controls, and then you focus on the things that you found maybe a little bit out of whack, and do these analytical procedures. Now, when we presented to the IASB, we argued that these stages don't make any more sense in the modern analytical audit. And eventually they'll be changing the way they do things. But this is kind of a high-level overview that gives you at least some idea of how these things could work. And this here is just the details that the audit texts tell you that you have to do. Now you look at phase 4 in phase 3 with analytical review and et cetera, you basically found things that might be wanting. And so you might perform additional tests and et cetera, et cetera. And finally, you have what you call evidence, and then you evaluate the results, and then you decide if it's a clean opinion or there are further work to be done. Now, although this looks nice and neat and step, when you're performing this, is not like this nice and neat, and there is a whole set of procedures. And this 4 stages, I think with the analytical audit, with the database audit, don't work very well. And this is actually what we are trying to change in auditing, but we are not having too much success yet. Now, one more comment I want to make about MADs, you're going to hear more about MADs, of course, is that you go with the full population, you extract what can go wrong and create suspicion index, okay? And this is a large number of notable items. And then you need to come up with a methodology to choose what's worth examining. And of course, you're going to consider materiality, and you're going to consider what you found in weaknesses of controls to see what's worthwhile. So our radar project actually finished up with 5 ways to evaluate notable items. And Jamie's paper is one of them. And we did machine learning stuff. We did just materiality, dollar unit sampling type of things, etc.